Welcome back to the Racial Draft Podcast, where our Captain America never has to apologize. I am your host, Michael Ford, and here for another solo episode where we change the complexion of the comic book universe, one draft pick at a time, through the Racial Draft. Yeah, we're still catching up. We're almost there. We're almost right on time with where we are in our season 8 Racial Draft. We just recently broke down round 7 of the draft, and now we're going to break down round 8. If this is your first episode, I apologize, but very quickly I'll just run down how this works. The various delegations, of which there are 10 that represent different races and ethnic groups, select these characters from the various Marvel and DC universes, and try to think about how these characters would be ideally optimally conceptualized and reimagined within the various umbrellas of the different backgrounds. Some characters will be kept as is, and some characters might be race bent, and that's how we do it. The racial draft is these characters get drafted in snake order. Those of you who played fantasy sports understand how a snake draft works, but the idea of each round, the order shifts, and we are, like I said, in round 8 of our racial draft, season 8. Let's kick us off with the first pick from the Polynesian delegation. They drafted Mera, the Queen of Atlantis. As we've seen over the course of a couple of Aquaman movies, where Jason Momoa portrayed Aquaman, the idea of a Polynesian in the Atlantis space is one that I think has resonated with a lot of people. But I think it would resonate even stronger if, someone who was not sort of trapped between two worlds. There's one of the things that we know about the kingdom of Zebel. I think that's how it's pronounced. One of the Atlantean kingdoms is that they're populated with more people of color people that are coded as people of color. So I think this is another instance where Mero, who is a native of Zebel, would best be associated with a Polynesian woman of color. And I think that this would be a strong addition to the mythos if Mera was conceptualized that way. The Polynesian delegation also gave us a fan cast, Megan Gale, who is a Polynesian model. You can find her picture on all the various social medias that Racial Draft is on. In addition, racialdraft.com is the hub and where you can find all the picks, all the polls going back in time, but most notably going forward in time. So you can keep up with our picks and you can cast your votes on our polls as far as your approval of these picks. And the different places that you can cast your vote. RacialDraft.com is the main place, but you can also cast them on Twitter, on Threads, on Instagram, and that's it for now, but who knows where we'll open up the different polling options. That's a little bit of the rundown, but let me jump right into the results of our Mera pick poll. 100% approval rating for Polynesian Mera, with 75% strongly approving and 25% somewhat approving. As far as the fan cast, another 100% of 75% strongly approving and 25% somewhat approving of Megan Gale as Mera. Moving on from our first pick to our second pick, and that comes from the Latin delegation. This is a fairly new character. I don't quite remember when she was introduced, but I think it was just in the last couple years. And this is Ellie Camacho, Eleanor Camacho. She is Deadpool's daughter, I believe, but she's definitely has the powers of Deadpool now, and she is not Junior Deadpool. She's also named Deadpool. And she's a younger character who's, of course, Eleanor Camacho is Latina. And the Latin delegation went ahead and scooped her up to stay as such. I don't really know a lot about the character. I've only seen her in a couple of appearances, but, far be it from me to criticize the Latina character remaining Latina. So for that reason, I got no objection, and seems the people have no objection either. 100% approval rating for still Latino Ellie Camacho, with 60% strongly approving and 40% somewhat approving. We'll move on from that pick to another character that's being, as we say, defensively drafted. The Jewish delegation drafted Kitty Pryde. Who doesn't know Kitty Pryde, Shadowcat of the X-Men, one of the early Viewpoint characters for, hey, we are joined by Jared.
Hello.
How's it? Hey, we're just talking about Kitty Pryde.
Perfect. I
So
can definitely discuss Kitty Pryde as she was one of my picks.
that is correct. So go ahead and talk about the importance of Kitty Pryde to the Jewish delegation.
Okay. Ooh, what a question. What a question. You know, Kitty was originally introduced right after Dark Phoenix during a very huge instrumental point in X-Men history, and she kind of served as this POV focal point character for for a very, very, very long time. She was 13, I think, when she joined the X, very, very young.
Yeah, I mean, I think she was at least, I mean, probably like a high school
Yeah,
freshman, right? So maybe, maybe more
14,
14,
14, 15.
but 13, right around there. Yeah.
And, she was one of the first comic characters whose, Jewishness was sort of integral to her character right from the get-go when she was introduced. Whereas, Magneto, the Holocaust origin, and his Jewishness was, a retcon by Chris Claremont, and same
Right.
thing with Ben Grimm, um, and I mean, so many of those earlier Jewish characters. But I think if I remember correctly, Kitty Pryde was introduced, and um, from the get go was Jewish.
Yeah. And I mean, I know we've talked about this
Mhm.
before, but, I think that the interplay between Kitty Pryde and Magneto, once sort of the retcon was
Yeah,
fully brought into play, having him use his identity to inform his worldview and, essentially kind of battle for the soul of Kitty, the struggle between Charles and Magneto in terms of what it means to be a young mutant and knowing that history of what happened to Magneto's people and of course happened to Kitty's
yeah,
people, helps to add that layer to her story of, you know, as being so young and so innocent and trying to maintain that
of
innocence
course.
over the course of her arc.
Yeah, it's like a real old school versus new school. I love that relationship, Magneto Kitty relationship. And then when she leads the X-Men later on, it or was that Ultimate? I think there's a point.
Is that the Ultimate Universe where she
Yeah,
did?
it's her and
Okay.
someone else, and I forget who the other leader is. I think that might have been an original character, but I don't love early Ultimate X-Men stuff. But later down the line, they do I don't know how well versed you are, or our viewers are, or our listeners are with Ultimate X-Men stuff. It's, obviously
Yeah, I didn't really love Ultimate X-Men, but go ahead.
later on they get a groove going, and they
Okay.
have Charles. This is after Ultimatum, I think. Charles Xavier is dead, and Magneto is also dead, though it's been a while. And Kitty is basically, and Cyclops is also dead, I think, because Cyclops would obviously
Okay.
lead the, Kitty is sort of thrusted into this position of leadership, and it's her and someone else, and I don't remember it, who this other mutant is, but it's these two characters really serve as a pseudo Charles and Eric, and it's super interesting, and really a moment in Kitty's history that definitely not a lot of people know about, but one of my favorite moments for the character. Kind of
Yeah.
interesting.
And and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that, one of your early picks was in this draft was Logan.
Yes.
And obviously, there's a very strong mentor-mentee
Yeah.
relationship between
Wolf in the
Logan
Cup.
and Kitty, and that I think that relationship would only be enriched by Logan. Of course, we didn't have an opportunity to talk about, your reimagining of Logan as Jewish, but I think that, he brings his own perspective, being long lived and having seen, how Jewish people have been mistreated over the
Truly.
years, and also wanting to maintain Kitty's sense of innocence while still training her up. Lethal
Right,
killer.
right. It's like I think Logan, it's interesting because whereas Magneto, his long life has sort of radicalized him,
Mhm.
the way that I would imagine Logan as being Jewish is he would always be sort of fighting against that. Like he's seen,
Mhm.
he's lived through everything, but he sort of goes about it like lives his life in spite of all that. Sort
Yeah.
of connecting to that like animalistic side of him. He won't allow
Yeah.
himself to be I guess radicalized in the sense.
Well, I also think that with Logan, there's a lot of
Right.
self-loathing in his character. He knows that his hands aren't clean, and even though he may have moments where he stands on a righteous path because of the stuff that he's done that he feels is unforgivable. Not that he thinks that he deserves his mistreatment, but he doesn't completely, what's the word I'm looking for? He doesn't let himself off the
Right.
hook in a way that
No,
Magneto
exactly.
does. Magneto is like, these things I do, the evil that I do is because humanity um, deserves it. To protect all mutant kind, I'm willing to break all these moral rules. Logan breaks a bunch of moral rules, and he knows that these are things that have to be done, but it doesn't absolve him of the moral weight of what
Right.
he's done.
And I think it I mean, one of my favorite Logan eras is Logan in Japan, and I think him being
Mhm.
Jewish totally recontextualizes that entire era in which I think he exhibits a lot of based on what he does in Japan, he exhibits a lot of like principles that are taught within like the Talmud and the Torah. And I just think it like sort of enhances that moment in his history.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. So yeah, Jared, for the new listeners, tell the people a little bit about you, about yourself. It's your first appearance of the
Yeah, no,
season,
it's
so
been it's
you
been a
know.
hot second. I'm Jared. I have been serving as the head of the Jewish delegation. I guess yeah. For it's been 2 years, 3 years. It's been a couple seasons.
Few seasons, yeah,
Five,
you
six,
know,
7, 8, 4 seasons. I
yeah.
won my first season. Yeah, coming in and winning was definitely like a very interesting being like the newbie and probably the youngest among all of us. I'm 21. I'm currently in a junior in college. I'm at American in DC. And yeah, we're looking to take the Jewish delegation to another victory this year. We're I
Nice.
think I'm still in the lead. If at some point you get to the scoring, I will love to be around for it and just take in my number one, first place slot.
I feel that. I feel that. So anyway, I'm gonna backtrack a little bit just because it's always good to bounce you know, these picks off of other people and get their perspectives. So the first pick of the round was the Polynesian delegation, and for for the Polynesian delegation, I mean, I think that's a strong pick. I don't know if you're a big fan of the Aquaman lore, the DC um
I mean,
universe.
like, I'm gonna be so honest, I don't know a ton about Mara outside
Okay.
of like a little bit, and then obviously I've seen the Aquaman movies, which I don't think like I think she's fine in the first one, and then I'm gonna be so real, I haven't seen the second one.
Yeah, I mean, we can get into the Amber Heard of it
Right.
all. That's a situation where her role, it very much felt like her role was scaled
Yes.
back. in the second
From what
movie.
I've
But one of the things that I had mentioned is that, she's native to one of the Atlantean kingdoms of
right.
Zebel, and that tends to be, in the comics at least, much more coded to people of color.
Interesting. I remember that like a
So
little bit.
yeah, so I think that this is a situation where having Zebel, unlike some of the other Atlantean kingdoms, be filled with particularly Polynesian people in their leadership would only kind of enhance that aspect of the.
It works for similar reasons why Jason Momoa Aquaman worked. And maybe more so since it is an isolated kingdom. It's a magic-based kingdom, right?
Right,
I mean, there is so much you can do with that. It's great pick,
for sure.
great pick.
And then there was Eleanor Camacho from the Latin delegation, who of course is Latina in the comics.
100.
So that's a no-brainer, right? We should talk a little bit about your fan cast for Kitty. We didn't get
Yes,
there.
Odessa Azion. Originally, I've had Kitty a couple times. I went with Maud Apatow, who I like. I think I just think that's a great, like, I think it 100% works. I believe she's almost 30 now. um,
Right, so she's aged out a little bit.
yeah, maybe like Kitty, like, or Kate. Like, she's Kate, she's Catherine.
No, I think she's back to Kitty. I
Is
think she's
she?
back to Kitty now.
I'm a little out of date.
No, they're doing some interesting things with her in the comics now,
I
I
gotta,
think. I know some people weren't fans of it, but essentially, like, she's trying to kind of make amends for some of the really
gotcha.
horrific things she did at the end of the Krakoa
Yeah.
era. And she just doesn't want to, she's trying to return to the roots of just mentoring young
Mm,
mutants and, get them, you know, she's been through what they went
yeah.
through when she was the viewpoint character. And she's, so yes, we're dealing with a much more world weary, not quite 30-year-old, I would say, Kitty Pryde, but definitely, she's a lot less fresh
Yeah.
faced than she
Yeah.
used to be.
Well, now Odessa, she's my 25 maybe. So she like the age 100% works. What did I see her in that I was like, you know what, this is Kitty, because it's only, obviously you want to try and match, like, you want an actress, or an actor that's Jewish, but like, if they can't play the part, they can't play the part. So like, but
Right.
I wish I remembered what it was that I saw her in, and I was like, she would make a great Kitty Pryde. And then I looked her up, and she's I believe, and the daughter of someone, like an act. Pamela Adlon is her mom, who's an actress.
What? Okay.
Um, but her hair, she has
Yeah,
the
she,
curly hair,
yeah, for
which I
sure.
think is not something you see a lot. You know, superhero movies, mainstream movies, period, really. I remember it was such a huge deal when Layla in Moon Knight,
Yes.
you know, her,
That's exactly what I had in mind.
yeah, May
Make
Column,
Column.
um, her
Yeah,
natural hair, it's amazing. So, I think more of that, which
I
Maud
agree.
Apatow does not have.
Right. But yeah, so from, I should have mentioned 100% approval
Oh, yeah.
rating, both for the pick and for the fan cast, with 66.6, 6.7 strongly approving and 33.3 somewhat approving, both, for both.
Well, good. Yeah,
Well done.
Kitty.
Well done,
Yeah,
people.
Kitty has become this, like, somewhat polarizing recently, I think.
Well, I mean, I know that there was an issue during the Krakoa era where people felt like the writers were trying to kind of erase her Jewish identity.
Oh.
And I mean, is that what you were thinking about?
Well, I mean, we all know Randy's issue with the character.
No, actually, no.
I mean, Kitty in,
Oh, we're talking
yeah,
about,
which I think is a
That's,
very reasonable grievance to have with the character.
I mean, that's fair. I mean, I joke about it. But I think that there's, if we really want to drill down on it, I actually think that I think that's in a different time than where we are now. The sort of like getting into the nuances of what it means to be a mutant vis-a-vis another marginalized group. I think that it was definitely not handled in the best
Of
possible
course.
way. But I do think that there's an interesting discussion to be had about the extent to which, in a pre kind of intersectionality era,
Interesting. Yeah.
people who were not mutants, but were members of other marginalized communities didn't understand, and didn't have an affinity for the mutant struggle. And I could see how, I mean, this plays into the idea of Kitty, as a younger character that's coming of
Hmm.
age. And in a lot of ways, it mirrors. I mean, you can speak to this because you're a college
Yeah.
junior.
Yep.
So I'm sure there were aspects of your college life where thought you knew it
Of
all,
course. Of course.
and maybe said some things, had some views. But having the benefit of a little bit more maturity, you can say, oh well, I have a little bit more
For
wisdom.
sure.
I could see an 18 or 19-year-old Kitty Pryde being a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, you use the word polarizing, but speaking a little bit more, um,
Sure.
incendiary because of her youth, because of how impetuous she is. And, I wouldn't expect adult Kitty Pryde to say the things that college freshmen, I,
That's a really, I haven't thought of it that way. And I think I would love to see more of that idea come into play. Just handled a little
yeah. I mean, it's like, and like I said, I mean, unfortunately, it's harder
right.
now to go into those waters because it's in the social media era, it's easy for like an out of context panel to make its way around and create a firestorm. We could talk a little bit uh later in the show about how out of context quotes really really go
Yeah.
viral in social media. And this would be an instance where, you just wouldn't be able to get away with throwing around
Right.
slurs.
Uh,
Like, but if we're being honest, I'm sure we've been around some slurs, that were sloppily thrown around, not necessarily out of a sense of animus and hatred, but just because of ignorance, because of people trying to make a strong point and not understanding how to be
yeah, and how
sensitive
to
about,
like voice that.
so like I said, I think that it's unfortunate that it's a panel that continues to
Yeah.
resurface. But on the other hand, I do think it's important to, put in its proper context as part of her arc, of her
Mhm.
maturity, and I think that obviously with a compressed timeline, it's really hard to know where in like someone's 40-year history,
Right.
what counts and what doesn't count. But, of all the characters that could have had that happen to them and happen, I think that she's probably the one who who can best absorb it without completely destroying their
Of
character.
course. Yeah. What a very like nuanced way to look at it.
That's what we try to be nuanced every now and then here at the Racial
Mhm.
Draft. So we're going from a pick that I loved, a couple picks that I loved, to a pick that I'm a little bit more dubious of, mostly because we don't really know a lot about this character, and that's Muse, who was drafted by the South Asian delegation. Now, it's been a while since I read that run in
Yeah.
Daredevil, but we really don't know who
Yeah.
Muse is.
There no just no Muse. There's no real name that we know of. That was no backstory that we know of.
And, this is a character that doesn't have a
Right.
face,
Exactly.
doesn't have any racial
No.
identifiers at all. So on one hand, we could say that Muse could be
Of
any,
course.
could be of
Of
any
course.
race. But on the other hand, we there would be no way of knowing, no way of knowing what racial background Muse is without knowing any of his backstory or
Yeah.
who he is.
Muse is Banks. Muse is supposed to be Banksy, right?
Oh yeah, I
Basically,
suppose.
like if Banksy took it,
Was a serial killer.
was a terrorist essentially.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, it's tricky.
It
Yeah, it's tricky.
feels like a little. I don't know. I don't.
Yeah. I mean that's kind of how I am. Like there's not enough there for me to say that I like disapprove
Yeah.
of it, but there's not a lot for me to sink my
Right.
teeth in as a reason to approve of it either.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Muse is going to be in the Daredevil show from what we understand. We know that we've seen him. I believe there is an actor cast. Like rumors point to a certain. I don't want to spoil it.
Yeah, yeah. Don't spoil it because I don't
Then
know.
I'm not
I
gonna
don't.
say anything.
I don't actually
I
know.
won't go
Yeah,
into it. No.
but so yeah, maybe as we learn, maybe we'll learn something about the character in the Daredevil show that we didn't learn in the comics, which will make that give us a little bit more room to
Yeah,
play in terms of exploring his his racial
could be
identity
interesting.
or even gender wise. I mean their racial identity,
Honestly,
honestly.
yeah, yeah, we don't know what their pronouns are. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I feel like there was a name put to like I'm just looking up Muse really quickly. Yeah, there wasn't even a. Never mind. Nope.
Yeah.
No name.
So now the more baffling part is that I'm a fan of Senthil
Yeah,
Ramamurthy, very handsome
truly.
man, very very good looking guy. It's a shame if he were because he was chosen as the fan cast for Muse, and
Behind the
I'm like,
mask.
what's the point of that?
Yeah.
The point of giving this extremely attractive man you not being able to see any of his assets.
I will say, rule of thumb, if you want people to vote for a fan cast, helps when they're attractive.
Yeah. I mean, typically it's a it's a good call. So anyway, I mean, so it was a 83.3% approval rating for South Asian Muse, which is a lot higher than I expected. And also 83.3% approval rating for Sindel Ramamurthy for the fan cast. So, I mean, hey, it works. As far as the people were concerned, they were fine with it, but like I said, I'm a little bit torn just because I don't feel it.
Yeah.
I don't really know where creatively, like how to make it jibe a little
Yes.
bit and sort of see the
So am
vision.
I. Part of me feels like it
Yeah.
might be a little, like a little icky. I don't know. I don't know how to feel.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, we'll leave it there. We'll move on to the white delegation. Generally speaking, the white delegation has an easy game to play. They can pick white characters to stay white. This one is, I guess we'll call him spicy white. Remy LeBeau, the old Cajun.
I, I mean, he's white in the comics, but like, I feel like that's a character that should be picked up by a different delegation.
I mean, he's definitely been drafted by other delegations in the past. I think what's tricky is that there aren't a lot of like, if we want to believe in, Cajun representation, even though there aren't a lot of actors that I can
Right.
name that are actually, of that
Yeah.
background, it's going to involve a lot of accent work and, it's a challenge to not have it come off as
Right.
comical.
Like caricature.
Yeah. So I think that knowing, having done a little bit of research, there aren't a lot of, there are, people who have a French, African Americans, for instance, who have some French in their background, but not necessarily Cajun per
Right.
se,
Well, I will say this. I was looking at Gambit for like a hot second, just to ride that like Channing Tatum, Deadpool, and Wolverine wave. And there is a Jewish Cajun actor, Shane West, who was
I didn't know Shane West
his his
was Cajun.
dad is like straight up Cajun. His father was born in or no, his mother is Cajun. Um, family long resident in Louisiana, of French and distant Spanish descent. And his father's Jamaican, which is interesting. What an
I feel like at one point he was rumored for. I feel like at one point he was rumored for a Gambit,
really
but
um
that was,
interesting.
or maybe that was a popular fan cast around the time that they brought Gambit into the X-Men Origins
Right.
timeframe.
I mean, he's on the older side. He's about almost 50. So, it would be an
Yeah,
older Gambit, but Channing Tatum isn't young.
yeah, but that's why I was thinking that he may have come up during the early 2000s, back when he would have matched with the
Yeah.
age.
Um I gotta say, I never got the Channing Tatum fan cast, and Deadpool and Wolverine.
I hated it. I've always hated it.
Honestly,
And I actually liked that it was
yeah, I
comedic
agree.
in the Deadpool
I
movie.
agree.
Like, I think that was the best way that it could have gone,
He could have
honestly.
never actually done it, but there were rumors about him being in Deadpool and Wolverine for like a while, and I was always like, why are we entertaining this? And he got me. He was a great part of that movie.
Yeah. But I was very upset when people were arguing that he should actually like play Gambit going forward.
And to be super honest, I don't love Gambit and Rogue are just not I know I'm in like the minority there, but like they're not my favorite.
Well, the thing, what you're saying, Gambit and Rogue?
I feel like Rogue and Gambit are everyone's like favorite like side. You know what I mean? You got like the main. You got Gene. You got Scott. You got Logan. You got Charles. And then there's some like the side characters like Rogue and Gambit and Kurt.
Well, as someone who was there for like the high point of, in the 90s of the like Rogue Gambit, like high drama soap opera of it all. I mean, if you think about it, you're dealing with sort of like classic YA tropes of the like dangerous, seductive man, who's got an accent and he's like smooth with all the ladies and he's a super charmer, but the one woman that he can't get is the one woman that he really wants. And know, Rogue being this sort of like tough,
Southern Belle.
hard-edged, southern, like, that's a type, right? Like a lot of guys have that type, of like so there was a lot in that, in those early days in the 90s of, of this star-crossed lovers situation that, spent decades not coming to pass. And, I think that it's funny though, because I think that when Gambit was first introduced in the comics, he was not popular with the boys because if there was an element of like maybe trying too hard to like manufacture and engineer a popular character, like he was so nice and he was so coded as this is the new cool character that you're supposed to like. But what I've learned is that even though the boys rejected Gambit, like he hit really hard for the girl, and they sustained his fandom through the hate. And eventually we kind of came around on Gambit. And now I would say he's much more popular
Sure.
than, like, across gender
Yeah.
lines than he was when he was first introduced. I think there was much more of a we hate Gambit, but they love Gambit aspect. But we both sides, I'd say, were invested in the Gambit Rogue, and then eventually when Magneto was introduced, love triangle of it, because it was kind of like, oh, like relate to, like there's this one girl that you really really want, and then all of a sudden like this new guy shows up
Yeah.
and sweeps her off her
Yeah.
feet, and I thought it was really well done in the X-Men 97
100% agree.
cart,
That that
they found
that
a
season made me get the whole deal with them.
which is, one of the great things about that show is that, as someone who was there at the time, their ability to compress these storylines, these long stretching storylines into 1 or 2 episodes and have them still hit with the impact that they needed to hit with was really
Yeah.
underrated
Ease for
aspect of the
Extinction. I
show, was
mean,
what made it
yeah.
special.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I will say this though, they'd never be on my like if I were to compile a team together for like a Marvel X-Men movie or TV show, they probably wouldn't make the cut for like the first whatever, you know.
So we'll move off of that to the sixth pick of the round, to the East Southeast Asian delegation, who drafted Harry Osborn. They also drafted in an earlier round Norman Osborn. So they're keeping it in
Yeah, keep it in the family.
yeah, exactly. My only objection, I've only got one objection: the hair,
Yeah, can't do the waves.
the hair,
Um
into
I
the
think
waves.
I
But
think a very interesting aspect of that culture that you can incorporate with Norman, more so Norman than Had, but is the idea of mask.
mhm, Goblin in particular.
Did they say which country?
I believe
So you can
Japanese.
incorporate kabuki like that. I would say Japanese. I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and claim that I know
Yeah.
Japanese culture like super well, but from what I do understand, that I think that is the way to go, and I am for it specifically because
Yeah. No, I can definitely see how, especially in some like certain designs, like I'm not as versed as I used to be in terms of the different like anime influences, and but I could see how some of the like mech style shows, and the like, I could see how those designs have already made their way into, like, for instance, like Ultimate Green Lantern. Green Lantern, Ultimate
sure.
Green Goblin. You know, seems like something that I could see in a Japanese show, or like, I think it could work
And
for sure.
you can like again with this like idea of like incorporating like the kabuki of it all, like the hanya, like the traditional demon masks can totally serve as the basis of the goblin mask.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I mean, I think that there's I think that there is for sure something there, if they wanted to go that direction. Obviously, I have my own biases because I've been watching Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man and Coleman
Really great.
Domingo's
Yeah,
portrayal of the
really
character,
great.
plus the waves of it all.
Plus the waves. I like the show so far.
And yeah, so the people approved 87.5% of East Asian Harry Osborn, 75% strongly approve, 12.5 somewhat approve, and 12.5 somewhat disapprove. The fan cast, I'm not terribly familiar with this actor. I know he was in One Piece, the Kenyu, so I can't really speak to how good of a
Yeah.
casting he is, but 90% approval rating of McKenyu, 70% strongly approve, and 20% somewhat approve, with only 10%.
I just looked up the actor. Very handsome man. I mean, it's only natural that they.
Yeah. Yeah, apparently he's Sonny Chiba's son. So there's like a Nepo element even to the actor.
Interesting. Do they have a Norman fan cast?
Yeah, the Norman fan cast was Brian T.
That's good too.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see him as a smooth, kind of in the vein of Coleman Domingo, like a more charming Norman than perhaps, we got from Willem Dafoe.
Yeah, I mean, with since they have Norman, and I totally approve of the Norman. I think Harry only like follows suit, so it's only natural.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, and of course, built into the Harry story is, having to deal with the fact that his father doesn't respect him in the same way. There's a lot of culture there as well, right? Of fail sons, particularly in Asian
hmm
cultures, of having to live up to the family name in a
yeah,
harsh, you
right.
know, the harshness of
And
that.
I'm sure you can incorporate like East versus West in terms of like how.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, like one thing that could play in, obviously, both can be Asian American, but maybe the idea is that Norman feels like Harry is a little too Americanized, like, and all this sort of
Yeah,
angst that comes from, that I've heard, comes from a lot of like third
interesting.
generation Asian Americans whose parents feel like they've lost their edge, so to
Yeah,
speak.
yeah. I think it's a really good casting. It's a really good pick. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm all in on that.
I agree. Moving on, we don't have to say too much about this one because it's the multiracial delegation. Almost everything works with a multiracial delegation. They already have Superman. They already have Superboy, Lois Lane, and they've got Connor Kent
Is that who they picked?
as well. Yeah, in this round,
I was
you know.
surprised that Connor was around for so long. I was looking at Connor for a bit, hoping to ride on the coattails of the David Cornsweet casting and what we know about that movie and what Lex Luthor is up to in that movie.
Yeah, that's my theory as well. My theory is that
Yeah,
Ultraman is Connor
yeah.
Kent
So
underneath that
yeah,
mask.
so that's I wanted to maybe do that, but it wasn't in the cards this
Yeah.
season. Maybe next season.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, the multiracial delegation is they've got a type right now. They're scooping up all the
Right.
scooping up all the tents. And hell, I mean, the only one that's out there that they weren't able to get is
Right.
Supergirl.
White delegation.
No, the multiracial delegation. Oh no, white delegation got Supergirl. Yeah, yeah. And even though like so the East Southeast Asian delegation got got Lex. So, but that's still multiracial.
Yeah, yeah,
Because he's getting the Superman genes and he's getting the
yeah.
Lex genes.
Makes
So
sense. Makes sense. Still a little salty that I can
yeah.
swoop in, but ninth round.
No, this is well, we're recapping the eighth round. So
That's a
right now.
really
So
good
yeah,
pick for the eighth round.
right. This is another character that fell, but for a good reason. Craven the Hunter, because of I would say the failure of that movie. Definitely a distressed
Yeah.
asset. A character that is held in high regard by comic
Yep.
fans, but that very tarnished
Yeah.
brand after after the
Yeah.
movie.
I was looking at Craven as well, but probably would have gone with
Yeah,
him later. I think there's a lot to work with Craven for Jewish delegation.
for the
Also
Swanamania
the
delegation.
Swanamania delegation.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, because you can go the route of like he's Turkish.
yeah,
Yeah, I very interesting.
yeah, yeah. And there's a Turkish community in
Yeah,
Russia, so like, yeah, it works
100%.
for me.
Yeah.
This one was interesting. I know I kind of helped to pitch this to the Native American
Mhm.
delegation, uh, Nia Nal.
Nia Nal isn't a character I am very familiar with at all.
So I watched the Arrowverse shows, so I know that this was mostly her story was developed in that show, and then it was kind of imported over into
Gotcha.
comics.
Never really watched it.
So like the downside of her being racially drafted, of
Mhm.
course, is that Nicole Maines, who played her in live action, has also written
Oh
her.
wow,
Um,
that's cool.
yeah, so a lot of the there's a certain amount of ownership that she has over the character, and granted, you know I don't think it's necessarily disrespectful to Nicole Maines and her, identity as a trans woman to also introduce the Native American
Hmm.
identity, especially because, she's supposed to be um, part of a community of aliens that were living on Earth, um, in a essentially, I wouldn't call it a reservation per se, but something similar, where it's a community that's aliens that are trying to hide away. So I think that could easily be set on our
That's
res.
interesting.
But her powers are kind of they're the kinds of powers that you could imagine the that Native American societies being
Right.
being into, being able to kind of walk in dreams.
They're,
And
yeah, total basis.
right.
I think that's cool.
So,
That's a really cool drafting.
but let's find out what the people thought about this draft. I haven't had an opportunity to check yet. Oh, 100%
Cool.
approval
Awesome.
of Native American
Awesome.
Neonal. 60% strongly approve and 40% somewhat approve. So went over, no fan cast for her.
Is
Yeah.
she white in the Arrowverse shows in the comics?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the actress is white. But it's funny though, like the way that she's illustrated, the way she's illustrated in the comics, she's got a little tint to her. To the point where I wasn't sure, if Nicole Maines herself might be something other than white, but I wasn't able to find anything about that.
So in that, like, I don't know, like, I think it only strengthens the character.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great pick.
And that brings us to the final pick of the round from the Black delegation, Lunella Lafayette, Moon
No,
Girl.
no notes.
Obviously,
Obvious.
we all love the Moon Girl
Mm-hmm.
series. And, so much of her story is tied into being a young Black girl and that in the struggles of, being a genius, but still,
Right.
if you've seen the show and you've, read the books, you know that it's kind of inherent in the character that she's a young Black girl and she struggles with what it's like to be pre-adolescent Black girl.
I'll say only this. I know Coriander was available in that round, and I'm pretty sure the Polynesian delegation snatched her up.
So you're
Yeah.
previewing the ninth round when we get to it, but
I
yes,
think maybe they, just from like a scoring standpoint, I don't know. I think that was a pick that the Black delegation missed out on because she was
yeah.
around for
I
so
mean,
long.
I've been talking with Randy about like all the Black characters that are still left on the board, and I know that they wanted Starfire at
Hmm.
one point, but there were so many
Yeah.
other characters that they, felt like were a little bit higher priorities. And, in my discussions with the Polynesian delegation, I was, just trying to like help them out with like characters that could be Polynesian, even if they weren't, it wouldn't necessarily be my first choice. And yeah, when we come back to you gotta be back when we discuss round
Yeah,
nine, because I have a lot of thoughts about
for
round
sure.
nine. But let's end it here as we talk about we had our extended X-Men
Yeah.
discussion, which could be its own pod, really. But before we go, I'd love to. I mean, you said that you have watched the Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man show. I wasn't going to talk about it when it was just me, but we might as well talk about the controversy of Hudson Thames. My position is a little bit different than everyone else's position, and it's only in this sense. He had an interview, and we never got the full interview. And I'm always a little bit skeptical of when a quote makes its way out into the world and we don't know what led up to the quote. We don't know how many questions were asked, whether we were going down a different path, and whether later in the interview, like he said some things that made the quote sound worse or better.
Like, could the? I mean, he used the term. I think it was like he he was worried the show would be
Annoying and
woke and
woke.
boring. Could that have been
No, woke and
woke
annoying.
and annoying?
Woke and
Could
annoying.
that have been
Yeah.
used in like a sarcastic way?
I mean, who knows? And also, I mean, the other thing is that we've talked about this before, but the term woke has kind of gone through
Yeah.
so many
Yeah.
iterations over the last few
Hmm.
years that, I don't think it's fair to ascribe the meaning of woke, of what he might
Yes.
have meant when he said
Yes.
woke, without more, without more. I mean, we could have questions, and a good interviewer would have asked a follow-up question of what he meant when he said that.
The term definitely like nowadays it is a bit of like a dog whistle to like, no one knows what the term woke means.
But that's the thing. It's a dog whistle when people want to use it as a dog whistle, but it's also not a dog whistle. Like, because I saw a whole bunch of people who were saying like, they had actually after, the quote came out, people had their opinions of it. Then they watched the show. And when they were like, but what is he
Yeah.
talking about? Of course the
Yeah.
show is woke.
Woke isn't a bad thing. Like isn't inherently a bad thing. Like the term woke was co-opted by people who don't know
Yeah.
what woke means and shouldn't be using the word woke.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, it's weird because what did he mean when he said the show wasn't woke?
Show
Because clearly, like, because most of the time when people are criticizing things for being woke, they're using it to say, oh, it's too diverse, or there are too many women, or too many people you know what I mean? Like, this show had all of those things. This show had social themes. This show, like, so if that's not what he meant when he said that the show wasn't woke, what did he mean?
You could say that the new Captain America movie is woke because it has, 'cause Sam Wilson is Captain. Like it's I don't it doesn't make
Yeah,
the word is meaningless now. I mean, there is a meaning, but not to the
right.
people that you see using the word woke. You know,
Well, also, and again, because the word is such a moving
right?
target, you know, there would have been a time where you were saying something was what was a good
Right.
thing, like,
People like Hudson Thames and people like me should not be. It should not be in our vernacular. If like at the end of the day, like it is
it should. I mean, but that's the problem. The problem is that when and that's an issue that I've had for a
yeah,
while now. That
rightfully so.
um that people once, no offense, but like once white people started
Okay.
using the word, it evolved in an uncomfortable
100%.
way because it was used in so many contexts that it didn't make sense. And then when people started making fun of it, because before became a dog
Hmm.
whistle, it became something that people kind of mocked, like, whoa, like, as in they're trying too hard, like, and if that's what he meant, because again, you know, who knows how in touch he is with online, social media, and how, like, people have seen this term become a political dog whistle. Maybe that's all he meant, that they were all like preaching, or what's the other term that people use? Like virtue signaling. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? Like, if he was using woke in that sense of like,
it was weird that
you
people would
know,
find it like that they were trying to
yeah,
like the word he was demonstrating. Like he doesn't feel that way. He's like bringing up how other people might feel. I don't know,
yeah,
like not to
how
be like a Hudson James
again,
apologist, but like you
no, but that's the thing. I don't consider it being apologist. I just consider that we don't
right.
know. And I think it's unfair for people to act like they know what
Yes.
he meant versus it raises questions that should have been asked in the interview. And if the questions were asked, and he gave an answer that never made its way out into the world, then that's bad journalism. If the question wasn't asked and they basically were like, ooh, we have a gotcha quote, and we're going to just let him kind of float out there
Yeah.
on this with this bad
Yeah.
quote. Like, that's
Right.
unfair
Look,
too.
sometimes a spade is a spade, right? But
Yeah.
you're seeing more often like headlines be like again like a gotcha quote. And I think the director Jeff Trammell. I mean
Hmm. Yeah,
he
just Tremel.
spoke out about the quote and said he thinks that Hudson just misspoke.
He just
Yeah.
misspoke.
And I don't like, like, from, it's right from the sort. Like, I will trust him, I guess.
Yeah. Now I know that there were people who were saying that, well, of course he has to say
Right.
that because it's his show and he doesn't want people to like. But on the other hand, if he actually had an issue, if he actually did have an issue with Hudson, there are ways that he could have distanced himself from what Hudson said without saying that he thinks Hudson's a good guy and just and he feels bad about what happened. Like if he really thought that Hudson was right wing adjacent or whatever, or like had these regressive views. There are many people who've said like, well, I don't agree with.
Yeah, Don Cheadle. Remember when Letitia Wright was spouting
Mhm.
all the anti-vax transphobic stuff? Like he spoke out against that. You
Yeah,
can you people do that. Like, and
right.
I guess Mr. Trammell just didn't like. I don't like. He probably knows best.
Yeah,
Like, so.
yeah. I mean, to me, Occam's razor here, especially given what we now having watched the
Yeah,
show, right? Like having watched the show, the context of the quote has to be that he was using it whatever he was saying something positive about the show. He was not saying that something was wrong with the
yeah.
show.
Like,
Right. So his use of the term woke his use of the term woke to describe a show that's very clearly
yeah.
woke
But he says,
in the way that I would use woke, in the way that traditionally we would use woke, as being socially aware and open and, portraying the world as it actually is.
yeah.
If that's not what he meant,
He does say woke and annoying, so
yeah,
that leads me to believe that it's like he's saying this as like this is what you know
yeah,
white people who use the word woke who take offense to.
yeah. But it could also mean, and again, like it's a nuanced thing, like going back to the whole aspect of like trying too hard, you know, like if he had said like trying too hard to be
Yeah,
woke, or like, but to me, the woke and annoying like suggests that it's like that there's an element of that because then immediately he talks about how authentic it
yeah.
is and he talks about
Ooh.
how well written it is. You know what I mean? Like,
Like
so
he just put it, but like if I may, it's like saying I hope the show isn't woke for the purposes of being woke. Like
yeah,
I don't.
which I'm sure people would have an issue
Yeah,
with if he phrased it that
it's
way
just
as
bad
well.
phrasing.
You know?
You know.
Yeah. But but if the gist of it is that, you know, I mean, everyone's got a different terminology, right? Whether you want to call it box
Mm,
checking, or you want to call it
yeah,
tokenism, or you want to call it, you know, preachy or trying too hard. But the principle, again, the term poorly poorly
of course,
chosen
100%.
words. But if the sentiment that he was trying to get at is that this isn't a show that's just having diverse characters and and trying too hard to be socially conscious. This is an actually well written, well drawn, thoughtful
It
show
is.
that just happens to have diversity. You know what I mean? Like,
It's an issue of intention versus impact, and unfortunately, impact outweighs.
but the impact was
Yeah,
magnified by the fact that the impact. So it's not even that's not fair because if they had put out the full interview first and then they put out the
yeah.
quote, at least we could say, well, poor choice of words, but overall,
It's the same thing as, I mean, not the same thing, but very similar to the Daredevil quotes that came out earlier this week, in which the showrunner of the new Daredevil show was like, you know, the show at its best is I don't know, something, and then at its worst
Yeah.
is a bunch of people talking about being superheroes or whatever, something like that. And people were
Yeah.
like, people thought it was about the episodes that were filmed and then
Netflix.
scrapped, but he was really talking about the original Daredevil show.
Hmm.
But only that part of the quote was released before the full interview.
Yeah. And I just don't think it's
No.
fair if especially if we're going to like, and I think rightfully, if we're going to talk about impact, then we have to talk about the extent to which impact gets magnified by the way that it's
Or
reported.
manipulate. Yeah.
Yeah. Same. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's the same difference, right? Because I think they knew that putting out that headline was going to
Yeah.
lead to people react, especially I used to be an editor. Like I have a certain amount of
Credence.
like, well, no, well, I mean, I'm just saying in terms of like how I personally respond to the construction of an
I see.
article. When you put the quote out there where you don't know what the context is based on the quote by itself, but then you provide context for it, even though you're not technically saying this is what he meant, what you're conveying to the reader is that this is most likely what he meant. And I just think that's irresponsible, you know? Like, and I think that like one of the things that I used to have to do when, like, if one of my writers transcribed an interview, even if I had a really good pull quote, like, I made sure that the pull quote didn't completely go against what, if you had read the whole interview in context, you know, what they were really trying to say, you know? And I just feel like maybe, again, we don't know. Maybe that's actually what he did mean. But I just think it's not fair to have the whole world and, on Twitter or all the other outlets that picked it up, just without even asking, without going back and, and getting.
Because now what you're doing is you're going to get clicks, but like it's at the deficit of the people that worked on this show. Because people are going to be like, oh, boycott your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and they're people who put years of their lives into this show.
And again, the irony being that the people who actually weren't going to watch the show because it was
Yeah.
woke, they're still not watching the show. Still, there. It's not like those people are like, oh, okay, well, now let's watch the show where Norman Osborn is black and where uh, Kirk Connors has been gender bent. You know what I mean? Like, so the people who would really appreciate the show are now turning against the show based on something that may or may not have been said by a person that is a fan of the show. So it's kind of
Yeah.
counterproductive.
And guess what? Even if that is what he meant, it's so easy to recast him.
Well, yeah, that too.
Like, uh,
Um,
I
but I'm not gonna, I think that he's in a tough spot, because I saw people saying we should have released a statement clarifying what he meant. And I mean, perhaps, but at this point, he already misspoke once. You got to make sure, I can see, and this came the same day or close proximity to when the Anthony Mackie statements about
so
America
stupid the
and
way people responded to that.
yeah,
Media literacy is just at an all-time low, and like,
yeah. So I could totally imagine Marvel PR being like, look, they're just going for our guys. They're just like taking stuff out of
this was a
context.
really bad week for Marvel, like publicity wise, and like for why, like
Yeah,
it's not their like. I mean, again, I don't know what Hudson's true intentions were, but like like Anthony Mackie, you know what his brand is, and he's right. Captain America isn't isn't like he stands for, you know, American ideals, but like they're ideals. They are not what we are. They are what we should all strive to be. But like,
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure. But there's always, I mean, and that's the sad thing is that especially for a character like Captain America, whether it's Sam Wilson or it's Steve Rogers, people who want to politicize the the character are going to find something to sort of sink their teeth in, good or bad. I mean, because you also had the issue of people being like, was Red Hulk supposed to represent Trump?
yes, yes. I'm sorry, but yes,
Like
and rightfully so.
I don't. I mean, I don't think it's a
No,
one to
of
one.
course,
You know what
of
I mean?
course not.
Like, I,
It'd be the orange
I
one.
think that like, I mean, I think that it is meant to resonate. I think it's meant to like, I think that the same way that part of what was happening during the comic run was that part of what he was representing was the challenges of Obama as
Right.
president.
Yeah, no, exactly.
That being like being the black president or being Black Captain America meant that there were going to be people who were saying that you weren't radical enough, but then there were going to be other people who were saying you're just by virtue of being the Black Captain America, you're radical, and they're not going to be rooting for you to succeed. So like so it's mixed up in that story that you know art is imitating means our life is imitating art because when it was Chris Evans saying similar things in interviews about what Captain America meant to him, it was fine because he wasn't challenging to the status quo. But because Anthony Mackie as Captain America is challenging to the status quo, there are people who are looking for him to mess up. And it's one of the reasons that I was way back before Falcon and Winter
Hmm.
Soldier, where I said, I worry because Anthony Mackie often like talks off the cuff and he'll say something and he kind of puts his foot in his mouth, but he's like a funny guy. Like he makes jokes. But like when you're Captain America, people want to take your jokes seriously. Like they want to misconstrue what what you have to say because it's a political
Yeah,
minefield.
and Anthony Mackie is unabashedly himself.
Yeah.
Like all.
So while I don't blame him
No,
at all because I don't think what he said was bad. I also acknowledge that this was always going to happen. There were always going to be people who were going to take whatever he said and twist it into something controversial.
I don't think it is his fault at all. Like he put out like another statement afterwards, like,
Yeah.
cool that he did that. He didn't have to do that. Like I think what he said, like there's nothing wrong with what he said. Zero.
But on the other hand, you know, I disagree that he didn't have to put it out because
Yeah,
you know
I see what you're
it's a $200 million movie that they need to like make,
Yes.
$600 million. Like, and anything that puts a negative spin on the movie this close to its release date, like you gotta get out in
From
front
the
of it.
business side of things, yeah, sure, he did need to
Yeah,
put out something, but like,
you know. I mean, it sucks that he did. It sucks that he had to, but he did have to.
and even his statement, he didn't necessarily backtrack on what he said,
No,
which again I respect and appreciate. But yeah, it's the same thing as like the Superman slogan being changed to truth, justice, and a better tomorrow.
truth, justice, and a better
Yeah,
tomorrow.
because like the American way isn't.
It's a loaded
Yeah,
phrase nowadays.
I'm curious to see what Gunn is gonna do with that phrase because I'm sure it will be incorporated somehow, and I don't see him going with the truth, justice, and a better tomorrow.
You don't see him going that
I
route.
think he incorporates American something, whether it's American
Hmm.
ideals or like I don't because I think
Hmm.
his take on Superman is gonna lean into the this man being like typical middle American farm boy, and like intrinsically there's a I don't know. I'm very curious.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely curious. I think that Gunn hasn't been afraid of certain
No.
themes, but I do wonder if he'll be reluctant to be overtly political.
Yeah, yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, and I feel like the American way he may just avoid it entirely, because like picking one way or the other, like does introduce that
I
element,
guess.
you know. But we'll leave it there. I mean, again, it was great having you. Hopefully, not the last time this
So,
season that you'll be here. Listeners, it's a lot longer of a show than you expected, which is, good. This is how we like it. We like we had a short one, and now we'll have a long one, and you can decide how you want to chop it
par for
up.
the course
But
for
let the people know where they can find you.
I am at Jared Kirsch, JaredKirsch_ on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram if you want to follow me on Instagram. Jared KirschenBaum on Instagram. Yeah.
Are you still
Not real no, like I don't know. They've definitely pivoted a little bit. Um
okay?
in terms of their output. And I'm also so busy.
Yeah, tell me
Yeah.
about it. Well, yeah, you can find Racial Draft at all the usual places. RacialDraft.com is the main hub website. Racial Draft Pod on Twitter and Blue Sky. Racial.draft on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube, so like and subscribe there. We're on TikTok. I should have mentioned that while TikTok is still a thing. And you can find us everywhere you find the podcast and like us and rate us 5 stars there. But until next time, all things are possible.